Syria's first multi-party elections have been branded a sham by many in the international community, and are considered unlikely to change the course of the country's long and bloody anti-government uprising. So, where to now for Syria? Joining me is Otago University's Professor of International Relations, Dr. Robert Patman. Good morning, Professor.
Good morning, Rachel.
So we have these multi-party elections in Syria. Some say it shows reform, others say they are a complete farce. I guess the main question here is anything likely to change in Syria?
I think in the long term it will. Certainly the regime, through these elections, which have actually already been politely rubbished by both the United States and the United Nations, because the United Nations has cast doubt whether you can hold multi-party elections while violence is still going on. And of course the United Nations is annoyed that they've only still got 50 of the 300 peace monitors in the country, and they hope to have much more by now. So there's real concerns about the background violence. But I think what this election could do is actually make some of Syria's allies very uncomfortable. It's always difficult, I'm talking about here Russia and China, it's always very, very difficult, Rachel, when an authoritarian regime like Syria tries to reform itself. And it clearly, if you look at the small print here, this is a multi-party election, but 50% of those elected will be representatives of workers and peasants, and they in turn belong to unions which are controlled by Assad's Ba'ath party. So the whole thing is basically only multi-party groups running are those who are running with the consent of the Ba'athist regime led by President Assad.
Is it really trying to reform itself, the regime, do you think, or is it simply buying some political time, putting a toe in the water, suggesting, you know, that it could head towards democracy? Is it really looking at reform, or is it just appeasing some of that international pressure?
No, I don't think it's serious. I don't think this is a serious gesture. It's a gesture, but it's not a serious attempt to move Syria towards reform. It's an attempt to buy time, to continue crushing the opposition. More than 25, it was reported, about 25 people were killed yesterday while the elections were being held. And also it's an attempt, I think, to appease Russia and China and try to befuddle international opinion, that is, to divide it. However, you know, the fact of the matter is the regime has made a crucial political concession. It said from the outset that the peaceful protesters which it gunned down were in fact simply foreign terrorists, but they're now conceding that the Assad regime needs to move towards a more representative form of government. So having made that concession, I think this measure will fall between two stools. It won't appease those such as China and Russia fully, and secondly it runs the risk of demoralising some of Assad's supporters. And of course, most importantly of all, it certainly won't satisfy the opposition groups who've largely boycotted it in Syria.
The ceasefire has been in place, we know, since April 12th. Can you see the UN declaring that actually there is no ceasefire at any stage, or could a declaration like that cause, you know, more issues for the people of Syria?
Well, I think we're creeping towards that point. It was significant that Ban Ki-moon, the UN General Secretary, made a very tough statement yesterday, in which he said there was, you know, violence and intimidation. And Kofi Annan, who's the architect of the 6-point peace plan, which is currently in place under the terms of the 12th of April ceasefire, said that the Assad regime bears primary responsibility for the ongoing violence. So I think the UN is nudging towards a position where effectively Syria will be increasingly isolated, and it may be difficult, given the change in landscape, for Russia and China to continue to support a regime which has not complied with the measures that they advocated.
Indeed, we have to leave it there. Professor Robert Patman, do appreciate your time this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.